Welcome to Build Strong Habits podcast channel. This is an audio podcast, so take your eyes off the screen, sit back, relax, and listen.
Okay, wow. Deep breath, everyone. These past 48 hours.
It's like the world tilted on its axis.
Right. I keep waiting for someone to tell me it was all just a crazy dream.
I know what you mean. The energy is definitely different. And it's not just here either. This feels global.
Exactly. And that's exactly what we're diving into today. The ripple effects of Trump's unexpected return to the White House.
I mean,
Who predicted a comeback like this? He swept both the Electoral College and the popular vote.
it really is a historic moment. You have to go back over a century to find a political comeback of this magnitude.
And the reactions are pouring in from everywhere. Kamala Harris in her concession speech talked about the long game. Accepting this outcome but emphasizing the fight continues for a better world. What did you make of that?
Her focus on the long game is interesting. It suggests a strategic approach to navigating the next 4 years, perhaps laying the groundwork for future elections, focusing on local initiatives, or building grassroots movements.
And Biden, in his acceptance speech, really hit that theme of unity.
Yeah.
Bringing down the temperature, he called it. It felt like a much-needed message after such a divisive election.
Absolutely. Especially when we consider the anxieties we're seeing from certain communities, like the LGBTQ plus community.
Right.
There's been a significant increase in calls to crisis hotlines since the election results came in. It's a stark reminder of how deeply personal these political events can feel.
It's a heavy reminder that these aren't just abstract political games.
Yeah.
Real people are affected, and deeply so.
For sure.
And then there's the international reaction, which is just as fascinating. Putin, of all people, signaling openness to restoring relations with the U.S.
Really.
He even cited Trump's assassination attempt and called his demeanor courageous.
Wow, that's a huge shift in tone.
I know.
It's likely influenced by the war in Ukraine and Trump's repeated claims that he can end it.
Right.
Remember, Putin has expressed interest in those claims, which suggests a possible willingness to negotiate.
It's like the geopolitical chessboard just got flipped over.
Yeah.
And everyone's scrambling to figure out the new rules. And it's not just Putin either. It seems like every world leader is rushing to congratulate Trump. He claims he's already spoken with over 70, including Zelensky and Netanyahu.
It's quite a whirlwind of diplomatic activity.
It is.
It's a clear sign that global leaders are ready to engage with the new administration, and I think there's a sense of cautious curiosity about how this will reshape the global landscape.
Okay, so let's talk about what Trump is actually planning to do now that he's back in the Oval Office. His appointments are raising eyebrows, to say the least.
Yeah.
Starting with Susie Wields as Chief of Staff.
Oh, wow.
It's historic, the first woman ever in that position.
It's a significant appointment, both symbolically and strategically. Wields is known as a political powerhouse.
Right.
She gets things done. This could signal a more focused, efficient approach compared to his previous term.
And then there were the rumors swirling around Robert F. Kennedy Jr. potentially joining the administration, possibly in a public health role. And get this, Elon Musk heading up a new Department of Government Efficiency, nicknamed DOGE.
It's an eclectic mix, to put it mildly.
Right.
The potential inclusion of figures like RFK Jr. and Musk suggests Trump might be looking to bring in outsiders, people who aren't entrenched in traditional politics.
Yeah.
It could be a way to shake things up, but it also risks creating friction within the existing power structures. It'll be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out.
One thing that hasn't changed is Trump's stance on immigration. That mass deportation plan, despite the estimated $315 billion price tag, is apparently still on the table. He's sending a clear message. His immigration policy hasn't softened.
It's definitely a policy area to watch closely. The economic and social ramifications of mass deportation would be enormous, and it's sure to reignite the heated ethical debates we've seen in the past.
Speaking of reigniting debates, there's still a lot of mystery around his plan for the war in Ukraine.
Oh.
He keeps saying he can end it in 24 hours, but won't share any details. The Wall Street Journal, however, is reporting on a possible deal. A 20-year delay on Ukraine joining NATO in exchange for continued U.S. military support.
If true, this deal would be a major concession to Russia.
Right.
The implications for Ukraine's sovereignty and security are huge. This potential agreement raises a lot of questions, and it'll be interesting to see how it plays out alongside Putin's apparent willingness to talk.
Definitely. All right, let's shift gears for a moment and look at the domestic side of things. We talked about the anxieties felt by the LGBTQ plus community, but there's also the personal story of Elon Musk's transgender daughter. She's vowed to leave the U.S. in response to Trump's victory.
It's a powerful example of how deeply this election is impacting people on personal level. It goes beyond policy debates and political maneuvering. For some, this is about their sense of safety, their identity, their very future.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And these anxieties are playing out on a larger scale as well. The governor of California is calling a special legislative session to protect state laws from potential federal overreach by the Trump administration. It's like they're preparing for a showdown.
California's move is significant. It highlights the potential for serious conflict between state and federal powers. Remember, California filed over 120 lawsuits against Trump's policies during his first term. It seems we might be heading into another era of legal battles over states' rights versus federal authority.
It feels like a power struggle is brewing. And amidst all this uncertainty, the financial markets are they're booming.
Huh.
The Dow Jones, the S&P, major European markets all hitting record highs. Bitcoin is surging. U.S. Treasury yields are up. The U.S. dollar is gaining strength. It's almost surreal,
It's a fascinating paradox.
isn't it?
While many people are experiencing fear and uncertainty about the future, the financial markets seem to be expressing confidence in the new administration. It's a disconnect that deserves a closer look. Why this disparity? What are the markets seeing that perhaps the general public isn't?
It's like people are holding their breath, waiting to see what happens next, but also trying to capitalize on any potential financial benefit.
Exactly. This situation is incredibly complex. It's a mix of hope and apprehension, opportunity, and risk.
Okay, one more area I want to touch on before we move on. The Middle East. It's always a geopolitical hotspot, but Trump's election seems to have thrown gasoline on the fire.
Oh, yeah.
The Taliban are talking about improving relations with the U.S., and then you have Trump, who's close to Netanyahu but has also criticized his leadership during the war.
The Middle East is already a volatile region, and Trump's unpredictable nature adds another layer of complexity. His personal relationships with leaders and his willingness to break from traditional diplomatic norms could lead to some very surprising outcomes.
It's a reminder that international relations are constantly in flux, influenced by a web of factors. And a change in leadership, especially one as significant as this, can be a catalyst for major shifts.
Absolutely. We often think about politics in terms of winners and losers, but the reality is much more nuanced. It's about evolving relationships, changing dynamics, and unforeseen consequences.
And speaking of unforeseen consequences, have you seen the Google search trends? Searches for emigrate to Canada have skyrocketed, along with searches for New Zealand and Australia.
It's a stark reminder that for some, the anxieties triggered by this election are profound enough to consider leaving their homeland. It speaks volumes about the deep divisions within the U.S. and the level of distrust that some people feel towards the current political climate.
It's definitely a lot to digest. In just 48 hours, we've seen a political earthquake, shockwaves across the globe, and a mix of anxieties and opportunities emerging. We've only scratched the surface. There's so much more to unpack here.
It's true. What we've seen in these initial 48 hours is just the tip of the iceberg. The real question is, what happens next? It really does feel like we're at a crossroads. The world is holding its breath, waiting to see which direction things will go. It's particularly intriguing to watch the international community grapple with this shift in power.
It's amazing to see how quickly things are developing on the world stage.
Yeah.
The idea of the Taliban seeking better relations with the U.S., it's mind-boggling, isn't it?
Yeah.
Makes you realize how unpredictable these geopolitical shifts can be.
It's a classic example of realpolitik in action.
Yeah.
National interests and allegiances can shift rapidly, especially when a new, unpredictable player enters the scene.
Okay, so we've talked about the global reaction, the anxieties here at home, the crazy economic boom. But what about Trump himself? What kind of signals is he sending about his agenda for this term?
His initial actions and appointments offer some clues. Choosing Susie Wheels as his chief of staff suggests a focus on strategy and execution. She's known for her ability to get things done, which could indicate a more disciplined and organized approach compared to his previous time in office.
It's certainly a departure from the constant chaos we saw during his first term.
Yeah.
And what about those potential roles for RFK Jr. and Elon Musk? Those are some unconventional choices, to say the least.
Absolutely. It suggests that Trump might be aiming to disrupt the status quo, to bring in people who think outside the box. This could lead to some innovative solutions, but it also carries the risk of clashing with the established political machinery.
I see.
It'll be interesting to see how that dynamic plays out.
And then there's his unwavering stance on immigration. The mass deportation plan is still on the table, despite the astronomical cost. It seems he's sending a clear message that immigration is a top priority.
It's an issue that resonates deeply with his base, and this commitment to the plan, even with potential economic and logistical hurdles, underscores its importance in his overall agenda.
And it's causing real concern for many people,
For sure.
especially those who could be directly impacted.
Yeah.
But while we're hearing a lot about potential deportations and policy changes, there's still that strange silence around the war in Ukraine.
Oh, really?
He says he can end it in 24 hours, but hasn't revealed any details.
It's a mystery that's fueling a lot of speculation. Perhaps he's keeping his cards close to his chest for strategic reasons, or maybe he's still working out the details. But this lack of transparency creates uncertainty, and that can be destabilizing in a situation as delicate as this.
It's like we're all on the edge of our seats, waiting to see what his next move will be. But this uncertainty goes beyond just the war in Ukraine, doesn't it? It feels like it permeates everything right now.
You're absolutely right. This sense of what happens next hangs over everything.
Right.
It's a moment filled with possibilities, both good and bad. And that makes it both exciting and a bit terrifying.
It's like the whole world is holding its breath, waiting to exhale.
Mm.
Okay, so we've talked about the global fallout, the anxieties here in the U.S., the bizarre economic boom, and the enigmatic silence around some key issues. But let's bring this back to the average person for a moment. Why should they care about these 48 hours, apart from the political drama?
That's a crucial question. These 48 hours represent a turning point, a moment where history could veer off in an entirely new direction. The decisions made, the policies implemented, the relationships formed or fractured during this critical period, they will all have ripple effects that touch every aspect of our lives.
So it's not just about politics playing out on a distant stage. It's about our everyday lives.
Precisely. It's about the economy, healthcare, education, the environment, our personal freedoms, our sense of security. It's about the world we're shaping for ourselves and for future generations.
Wow. When you put it like that, it really hits home. It's easy to get caught up in the headlines and the social media frenzy, but this is about something much bigger than just who occupies the Oval Office.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a reminder that we all have a stake in this.
Uh,
We need to stay informed, to critically analyze the information we're bombarded with, and to engage in thoughtful dialogue about what kind of future we want to create.
It's funny. We started this deep dive talking about how dizzying these past 48 hours have been. But now I'm feeling a different kind of dizziness, the kind that comes from realizing just how much is at stake.
That's a natural reaction. It's
Right.
a lot to process, right?
Yeah.
And the stakes are indeed high. But this awareness, this sense of responsibility for shaping the future is ultimately a good thing.
Yeah.
It can empower us to participate more actively in the democratic process and to hold our leaders accountable for their actions.
I think you're right. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, but we can't afford to be passive observers. We each have a role to play in shaping the future.
Absolutely. And one of the best ways to do that is to stay curious, to keep asking questions, and to seek a deeper understanding of the forces that are shaping our world.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here today. We've explored the global reaction, the anxieties here in the U.S., the economic implications, the glimpses we've seen of Trump's agenda, and the lingering uncertainties surrounding key issues like the war in Ukraine. But there's still so much to unpack, so many layers to this story that we're only just beginning to peel back.
That's true. And that's what makes this such a compelling time to be alive. We're witnessing history unfold in real time.
Right.
And the choices we make today will determine the course of that history.
It's a sobering thought, but also an empowering one. It reminds us that we're not just passive bystanders. We have agency, and we can make a difference.
Exactly. And that's the message I hope our listeners take away from this deep dive. Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay hopeful. The future is not predetermined. We have the power to shape it. It's a reminder that we're not just living through history, we're actively creating it.
Yeah.
And I think that leads us nicely into some of the specific areas I wanted to explore further.
Okay.
We've talked about this tension building between state and federal governments.
Right.
It feels like a power keg ready
Yeah.
to explode.
Right.
California's governor is already gearing up for a fight, vowing to protect their state laws.
And it's not just California either.
Right.
Several other states are likely to push back against policies they see as harmful or overreaching.
For sure.
It sets the stage for a real power struggle, and the outcome could have a huge impact on the balance of power in the U.S.
Absolutely. This potential clash raises some fundamental questions about the future of federalism in the U.S. Will we see a more assertive federal government under Trump? Or will states successfully defend their autonomy? It's a dynamic worth watching closely. It could reshape the relationship between states and the federal government for years to come.
It's like we're entering uncharted territory, constitutionally speaking.
Yeah.
And speaking of uncertainty, we've touched on the anxieties felt by various communities, particularly the LGBTQ plus community.
Yeah.
Elon Musk's daughter, choosing to leave the country, speaks volumes about the fear some are feeling. What are your thoughts on how this administration might impact vulnerable communities?
It's a valid concern and one that
Right.
deserves serious attention.
Yeah.
Trump's past record on issues like LGBTQ plus rights and immigration raises a lot of questions.
Right.
And the increase in calls to crisis hotlines is a clear sign that these anxieties are very real.
It's heartbreaking to know that people are feeling so vulnerable and uncertain about their future. It really underscores the importance of advocating for their rights and supporting organizations that provide essential services.
I couldn't agree more. We need to be vigilant and proactive in protecting the rights of all individuals, regardless of their background or identity. And that means speaking up, holding our leaders accountable, and supporting those who are most vulnerable.
Okay, one last area I want to touch on before we wrap up.
Okay.
The Middle East.
Oh, yeah?
It's a region that's always teetering on the brink, and Trump's election seems to have thrown another wrench into the works.
Definitely.
We've talked about the Taliban's hope for improved relations with the U.S., and then you have Trump, who is both close to Netanyahu, but also critical of his leadership during the war.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on how this complex situation might play out?
The Middle East is like a giant puzzle with no easy solutions.
It really is.
And Trump's unpredictable nature adds another layer of complexity.
Right?
His personal relationships with leaders like Netanyahu and his willingness to break from traditional diplomatic norms could lead to both opportunities and dangers.
So it's a wait-and-see situation, but with potentially huge consequences.
Exactly. The region is already grappling with multiple conflicts, political instability, and humanitarian crises. Trump's approach could either exacerbate these issues or perhaps create unexpected openings for progress. It's too early to tell, but the stakes are incredibly high.
It feels like the entire world is holding its breath, waiting to see what happens next.
I know.
I know I am. We've covered so much in this deep dive. The global shockwaves, the anxieties here at home, the economic paradoxes, and the potential for conflict on multiple fronts.
It's a lot.
But I think what stands out to me the most is the sheer uncertainty of it all.
I agree. This moment is pregnant with possibilities.
Yeah.
And while that can be unsettling, it's also incredibly fascinating.
It is.
We're watching history unfold in real time, and we each have a role to play in shaping its course.
It's a reminder that we're not just passive bystanders in this unfolding drama.
Right.
We have agency and we can make a difference. Whether it's through our votes, our activism, or simply engaging in thoughtful conversations about the future we want to build.
That's a perfect note to end on.
It is.
This is a time for vigilance, critical thinking, and active participation.
Right.
We can't afford to be complacent. We all have a stake in shaping the future, and it starts with understanding the present.
Well said. So to our listeners, thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the aftermath of the election.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been a whirlwind, and we know there are many more twists and turns to come.
For sure.
Stay informed, stay engaged, and stay curious.
Absolutely.
The world is changing rapidly, and it's up to each of us to keep up and make our voices heard. Until next time.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Build Strong Habits.